Clinton, Iowa. He had some connection to some folks who had worked on the railroad in Iowa and some of the Greek community there. The meeting participant wants me to know it's recorded. Got it. He was living in a boarding house, and he found a job steaming and boxing hats. So when you cleaned hats back then, you had to reshape them and steam them, and that's what he was doing. Don't ask me how he got my grandmother to marry him in that situation. But in 1933, he married Olive Mary Fries, and that's my grandmother. He had another business, but in 1937, he opened a small candy shop called Candyland. And it was a little like our store, except all the candy making was in the back. He had cases up in the front, and then there was a little dance floor and some pinball machines, and it was a place where you would go hang out after school. And if you were a fella, maybe you could find a girl and get her attention or something like that, a place like that. He started that with a partner, a gentleman named Mr. Christakis, a good Greek name. There's a reason. And in 38, he bought out Mr. Christakis and had the place to his own. So Terry and I have tried to continue the tradition of what he did. So look, calling it Olive Freeze Chocolate Store did not seem as cool as Hazel Hill Chocolate Store. So Terry's grandmother's name won out, but we make candy and confectionery by hand in small batches, very much the way that he did in the 1940s, 50s, and 60s. And it's simple ingredients, and part of it is the warm smile. If you went into my grandfather's shop, he had a leather cup on the counter, and he would roll you for the ticket, double or nothing. And so there was always something going on or something he was doing like that. A few milestones. In 2003, we bought the assets of a failing candy store is how we got started. And we operated that in place and got some operating knowledge from the fellow who had that for a while. In 2005, I was part of the team that helped launch the SE2 company, if you're familiar with that. So that brought my family to Topeka, and we brought Hazel Hill with us and opened up in downtown on St. Patrick's Day in 2005. And Vince is right, we haven't been able to do it because of COVID, but every year we try and do a day where we say thank you and we give away free fudge, and usually that's in the spring, but hopefully we'll get rid of the COVID and we'll be able to do that again. And we did have a shop in Manhattan, Kansas, and that did well and until the rent went up in Manhattan, Kansas. And we decided to let that go and use those assets to purchase the buildings in Topeka. So we now own our buildings downtown, and we live in our loft above our shop now. So we're both downtown merchants and downtown residents. In 2019, we were very surprised to win 3 international level awards for chocolate making, and got to travel to New York to receive those. And I'll talk a little bit more about that. And probably the one I'm the most proud of, our Sea Salt Caramel won the gold medal in the 2020 Chocolate Alliance Awards. That's a global competition. So I'm sorry, that's a little self-serving, but my wife and my son Daniel actually made the product that won that award, and we are quite pleased to be recognized at that level, and happy to have something of that caliber in our town, right? And you need to spread the word that to those that say Topeka doesn't have things. So I'm going to shift gears a little bit now. And I'm going to talk about something called bean to bar chocolate making. So in 2016, I stopped working on all the rest of the things in Hazel Hill and spent a year and a half figuring out how to import cocoa beans or cacao, how to source them, and how to turn those into specialty chocolates, because that appeared to be the largest segment of growth in the chocolate market, was high-end premium chocolates sourced from individual origins. They have unique flavors, and we hand process them in our shop in Topeka. So you can't see it, but we built a separate kitchen that is gluten and nut-free in the basement, where we actually bring in cocoa beans in sacks and we refine it into fine chocolate. Now, I don't know if I got everybody, but I tried to put 2 bars of chocolate on all of your tables. And most of you should have one that says Semaluki Forest on it. I'm going to talk a lot about that origin, and you're certainly welcome to break that thing open and taste it. You must be an advanced student. Thank you. So Semaluki Forest is a nature preserve in Uganda, is where that chocolate is sourced from. This gal in the picture is actually in Uganda in that forest. And I don't know if you can see it on these screens, but can you see that green pod hanging off the tree? And if you look hard, you'll see a few more of them. Those are cacao pods. So that is chocolate's beginning. It is a fruit that grows on a tree. And this area of Uganda happens to get a lot of rain and is fairly temperate, and that affects the flavor of the chocolate. A couple of times a year, they go into the fields and they cut those pods off the tree. And again, I don't know how well you can see it on the screen, but they break the pods open, and inside there's a fruit called baba and seeds inside that fruit. And these folks are taking those shells off and pulling the fruit out. And after the fruit is extracted, it's allowed to ferment. And this particular location, they use box fermenting. So these 3 boxes, the beginning of the fruit goes in the top one, and as they want to turn it over a period of about a week, it'll drop down to the other boxes. So 3, depending on the world, where in the world it's done, it's 3 days to a week. It's cooler here, so it's going to be 5 days to a week of fermenting, and basically that seed cooks in that fermenting fruit. Does that make sense? And the little picture in the corner is what the seeds look like, and typically they're covered with banana leaves or whatever they have to help retain the heat in a location like that. This is not in Uganda. This is actually in West Africa. These gals are drying the seeds after they have fermented and cooked. It's at this stage that most of the final flavor has been developed. So it's really during the ferment that happens. And those of you that are tasting the Semaluki, you may taste some fruit type notes in there, and that's normal. Most commercial chocolate is treated with alkali chemicals to take that out. So what you're tasting now is actually what it tastes like. You also have another bar, one from Vietnam or Madagascar. Give that a taste and compare and contrast. That's going to have a little different bitter and fruit taste to it. Ingredients are the same. It's really the cacao that makes the difference in what those taste like. So why would we go to all that trouble? Well, I don't know if you can read. This may be a bit of an eye test. The global price for cacao right now is about $1.50 a kilo, $1.25, $1.50 a kilo. For the Semaluki Forest cacao, the farmer, instead of $1.50, is receiving $2.37 a kilo. And that may not sound like a lot until you read the box on the upper right, that a typical farmer is making $115 a year growing cacao. These are unbelievably poor people, and the life they live is subsistence farming, and cacao is the cash crop that pays for electricity or schools for the kids or shoes or those type of things. The rest of their living is really subsistence farming. So we're paying 2 to 4 times the going rate for cacao for these specialty beans. And we're working with folks that make sure that money gets to the farm and is not consumed by middlemen, and that what's happening in the labor and environment is done in a way that you would feel comfortable with what's happening there. Does that make sense? So you are eating a premium product partly because it is a premium cacao. And part of what we're trying to do is to upgrade the producers of cacao and incent them to produce a higher quality product. Most of these are smaller farmers, think 2 to 5 acre farms. To us, it would look a lot like a jungle more than a farm, because it'll be growing with bananas and coffee and zapate and all kinds of things that they would be using for subsistence there. So that's what happens at the origins. It generally takes us about a year to get a new origin found and brought in. We generally buy small batches from a lot of them and whittle down targets from there. And then we will work out an import-export relationship and go through the process of auditing the labor and the supply chain and make sure that everything is okay. Once we have done that and we bring in the cacao, we're not small enough to consume as much as is produced. So we partner with other chocolate makers and we'll purchase at least 1 shipping container of cacao. So that's 22 metric tons. It is kind of the minimum trade quantity there. So we need partners in order to do that. And then at our end, we take those dried beans in and we basically turn cocoa beans that you see on the left into chocolate bars by hand. The first step of that is we roast the chocolate. Ours are drum roasters. We have a gas one and we have electric ones as well. And we roast to a time and temperature profile to develop the flavor in there. Each one of those roasts is unique. And then I wish I could bring some and show you, but the cacao seed has a shell on it, kind of like the skin on a peanut. It's a little harder than that. So we actually built equipment to crush those down and to separate the shells and the seeds. There was not commercial equipment at our scale to do that, so we ended up building it. After that, it goes into a stone wheel grinding machine. And I don't know if you can see it real well. I'm putting the nibs, the crushed up seeds in there. That machine has stone wheels and paddles in it. And the bottom of the drum is made out of stone. It will spend 2 to 3 days, 24 hours a day in there being ground down. And that's when those solid nibs will become liquid. The oil will come out of the vegetable solid. And that's where we'll introduce any sugar or anything else that we're putting in there, and we'll refine that down into what you would recognize as a liquid chocolate. And part of the flavor development is the heat and the pressure that we would use during this stage. So there's a time and temperature and pressure profiling that happens to develop the flavor. And not just the taste, but we can actually manipulate when the flavors show up. So depending on when we put sugar in and how fine we make the particles and how fine we make the cacao solids, we can actually change when the tastes show up. So there's a fair amount of, we can't make the taste, but we can manipulate them a lot, is what we're doing as chocolate makers. The next stage in the process is tempering and molding. So chocolate needs to be have a special treatment in order for it to set up properly. And we mold it into bars and wrap them up and serve them to you. So I'm going to jump to the end there. And now it's your turn to talk. So I'd like to take questions, but I'd also like to know, if you can do it, what did you taste when you tasted the chocolate? Did it remind you of something? Okay, you got kind of a lemon orange flavor. Okay, that's actually natural for chocolate because it is a fruit seed, and the fruit, the white baba, tastes like kind of like honey and lemon dew, honeydew melon and lemon crossed together. I don't know which one she has at the table back there.
That was the one that you suggested.
The samaluki?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. Okay, the other thing you may taste in the samaluki is a bit of a milkiness to it. There is no milk. That's actually lactic acid that was present during the ferment of that bean. Good. That's excellent. That's actually, being able to put that into words is actually hard. So very good. Okay, a couple other gals were putting hands up, but please ask a question.
I just want to say, first of all, fascinating. I've always liked your product, but I had no idea. And you did, and I'm so glad I came.
Thank you. Thank you. This guy deserves a lot of credit for it.
I've just eaten chocolate.
Yeah, he's got 2 bars up here to himself and he's kind of just laying low and
Are you affected by the backup in the ports of all the
so I'm going to repeat your question. Are we affected by the backup in the ports and other supply chain challenges? Absolutely. So our product, whether we make the chocolate or we're using chocolate from someone else, it's a globally sourced product. So all the things you read about ships being stuck affects the cacao, but also think, for example, we have a melting tank that's broken. It's made in Switzerland. There are no parts, there are no replacements, there are no, normally we would be able to get that in a few days. It's been 3 months, so we're still working on getting a new temperature box for that. And think those that supply us are having the same problems, right? They may have the raw ingredients, but if a piece of machinery is broken and they can't get the people or the parts, the whole train comes to a stop. We are right now carrying a ridiculous amount of inventory in chocolate and sugar because of that. We came dangerously close this summer to running out of chocolate because it was just not available. So you'll forgive us when you come into the store and see boxes piled all over. That's what that is. That's not normal. We're really trying to mitigate the consequences of that the best that we can. So can I, hearing this, will you please help those you know, be generous with those of us that are trying to slog our way through that? It's going to get, in my opinion, worse this fall. So it's very likely as we roll into Christmas and those kind of things that we're going to have either supply chain or labor problems in delivering product, and we are not unique or alone. So can I just plead with you to have a little grace for those that are trying to slug their way through a tough time, and would you be one of the ones that spreads the word to those that you come in contact, that have a little grace and patience. People are working pretty hard and doing the best that they can. So I hope I answered your question okay. But let's get this gal in the front, and because she's been very, and she could kick me in the shins and you can't. We'll get to you in just a second.
My question, what is the most difficult part of the manufacturing in Uganda? You know, when we were doing that. What is, do most of the women do that drying?
So it depends on the location. The one I showed you in Uganda, about half of the farmers are women. In that relationship, the import-export company is owned by a woman, and they actually go in. She has an NGO background. They go in and actually develop a centralized fermentary for these farmers. So they instead of each one trying to ferment their own, they build a facility to help them do that better. And that's one of the reasons Uganda is now available, is they have raised the quality of the product they're producing high enough that folks making specialty cacao at those higher prices will now buy Ugandan cacao. Does that make sense? So Brazil is coming back. They actually became a net importer of cocoa in 2009, I believe it was. They had a disease, actually a deliberately introduced disease that took them from the 4th largest exporter to a net importer in 18 months. Yeah, and you probably heard about it. There were a bunch of news stories at the time about cacao is going to go away forever and chocolate's going to disappear from the earth. And that's what spawned that line of reporting. Was the disease is called witch's broom. It's a type of fungus that grows on cacao, and it just devastated Brazil, and it was a deliberate act of sabotage. So cacao is not going away, but disease is a major challenge, especially among these species, because they are ones that have not been bred for disease resistance and high production. So the cacao that somebody like a Mars or a Hershey is using needs fertilizer, has been bred for disease resistance, and it's not as big a problem as it is for these smaller farmers that are using the older hybrids. So that's a particular challenge. Just the money is a problem. Just like we struggle in Topeka, they're struggling with the kids don't want to work on the farm, right? The kids want to go to the city and make some money and have an iPad and and all those things. So that's the struggle, and that's kind of part of what this craft chocolate movement is trying to address, is how do we create a product we can market to you at a high enough price that we can support a growing wage at the farm in order to keep the small farmers there and not let it become completely a commodity product. Does that make sense? Let's get this gentleman, and then I see a young lady with her hand up over here.
Two questions. The first one is, does the bean itself have any natural sweetness, or does sugar have to be added?
So the question is, does the bean itself have any natural sweetness? The answer is yes. And again, I wish we could bring in and share you with, it's not unpleasant to eat a good quality cacao nib. That acrid bitterness that we associate with baking chocolate, and most of that is poor quality beans that have been treated with potash, and it develops that kind of acrid bitter that we don't like. That's not true of natural cacao. Now, do we add sugar to them? Yes. Now, if you ate the Semaluki, that's a 72% cacao chocolate bar. That is 72% of that bar is the bean. And that's roughly where kind of the edible chocolate is ending. So you're at the highest end of cacao content in that bar. And I don't know about your taste, but it's quite approachable even at that because of the quality of the cacao.
Second question, you said temper chocolate.
That could be a long discussion, but let me give you the short version. So the cacao, the chocolate bean, is about half vegetable solid. The other half is an oil called cocoa butter. Okay, that oil is weird. When it solidifies, it crystallizes. Oils do that, all of them. But cocoa butter will actually crystallize in 6 different forms. Only one of them, the type 5 crystal, is the one that makes it pretty and shiny, and it doesn't melt when you touch it. And when you broke that bar, it snapped nice. That's because that type 5 packs those triglyceride molecules so tightly. And there's a number of ways to do it, but think there's a heating and cooling and manipulation process we go through to persuade it to make that type of crystalline structure. And a chocolatier, that's a lot of what a chocolatier learns to do very well, is how to take that chocolate and manipulate it into that very pleasing state that we're familiar with. Okay, hang on, we had a girl in red over here, and then we'll get to you.
Well, thank you very much, Paul. Did I understand you correctly that your approach of trying to get the alcohol is really more like a fair trade transaction? Is that my understanding?
Yes, so let me talk about that, because you're essentially dealing with sourcing ethics.
Yes.
One way to achieve that understanding that everything in the sourcing is okay is to use a third-party certification, and that's what fair trade is. So a third party comes in, has a set of rules and audits that they define that make sure that the money is going where it's supposed to. And it goes beyond just getting the money to the farmer. It actually specifies they have to spend so much on community improvement, and it's fairly involved. So when we can, we buy fair trade. Not every producer we deal with is big enough to support a third-party program and the audits and the costs that go with that. So we will also accept direct trade. That means that we know and have a relationship with everybody in that supply chain, and we directly audit what's happening there. Does that make sense? So I don't want to be disingenuous. Not everything we would consider and bring in is fair trade. We would also do direct trade relationships.
Well, I commend you for that, and I would encourage you to use that as part of your market. Hearing your presentation today helps me appreciate the cost of your chocolates, which I.
Thank you. Thank you. There's a cost, and it is something we pay a lot of attention to, and there's a lot of behind the scenes work that happens to make sure that we and any partner we deal with is going to be something you'd be comfortable with.
And based upon this ethics, this values, I would encourage you to become a Rotarian.
Well played, madam. Okay, we had a hand over here. I think it was the gal in the pink shirt.
Sort of the ethical side, because this chocolate is one of those industries where I think we hear a lot of things on the news, sort of like chocolate and coffee and things where it's coming from parts of the globe where we don't know the workers' conditions. So the more transparency, I think, the better, and it's wonderful to know how much you care and the due diligence that you do on every facet of it.
Thank you.
I did have one other question, which was, I watch a lot of Great British Baking Show.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Most of the contestants, they may be amazing bakers, but the one thing they fail at is tempering chocolate.
Yes.
So what are your tips for successfully tempering chocolate?
You know, we've talked about having a class on this, and we probably should.
Yeah.
We probably should do that. If you're going to do it at home, I'll give you the short version. If you're going to do it at home, I would strongly recommend that you just use a microwave. Okay, now listen, you don't want to just zap it in there, but do maybe 30 seconds at a time to warm it up till it's about 90, maybe 100 degrees. And you need a good thermometer. The best one are the ones that are filled with liquid, and you can get them on Amazon for $5. Yeah, don't get the dial ones or any of those things are just junk. And if you come down, we'll show you the one. It's I don't know, $5-10 but they're unbelievably accurate and they're right. So warm it up and reserve out about 1/3 of the chocolate off to the side, and then as it cools, bring that chocolate back in as the seed to start that crystallization. And then on your table, whatever bowl you're using for the chocolate, have a little bit bigger bowl of warm water and a little bit bigger bowl of cool water, and use that to maintain the temperature as you go. It is kind of the easy way. Now, if you don't want to mess with that, you go buy the almond bark stuff and then you zap that baby in the microwave. You're going. But it doesn't have any cocoa butter in it, is why you can do that. Okay, so no, tempering is it's a hard skill to get right, and
You have so much appreciation after British Baking Show.
yes. Well, and sometimes we cheat. If you spray the inside of your molds with cocoa butter, you can actually make it look. So you take an air gun and you spray them, and so there's ways to to cheat if you need to. Okay, let's get Karen and then the gentleman in the red shirt.
Well, Nick, I think you've got us all hooked. This has been a wonderful presentation.
Thank you.
So my question would be, since maybe all of us would love to get a chance to taste that chocolate nib that you talked about.
Yes.
Do you ever do tours at the shop, and if so, about how many
We do tours. We will do a basic tour for no charge. We'd like to see somewhere between 8 and 20 people. At more than 20, it gets to be a little unwieldy. But we're also happy to do, if you want to bring, your family and the grandkids, we would be happy to do that. We have paid events that are a little more involved, and we're just starting those again. And we also have a ticketed high-end chocolate tasting where we go in much more depth, and we go into actually tasting and analyzing chocolate for flavor. And that's more like a $35, $40 type event. And we'll have those coming back soon. We've just been real hesitant with COVID because in our place, there's really no way to do these in distance. So even when we do them, we're going to have to make sure everybody knows that you're going to be close with people, and you need to make some good decisions about that. Sir.
I'm interested in the shelf life and how long is the quality versus great. And what commercial chocolate where they started to get a little choppy thing on the outside.
Yeah.
It looks like maybe they're just old. Do you use preservatives or
So we don't, is the short answer. We if you look at our products, the only chemical you may not recognize on our labels is something called lecithin. It will not be in this handcrafted chocolate, but it's a sunflower derived emulsifier that for the chocolate we use in chocolatier work, we need it fairly thin, and it helps it hold a little more moisture and be a little thinner when we work with it. But you can be comfortable, there's no goofy chemicals. So when chocolate sits too long, especially if it gets warm or is exposed to UV light, the oil that we talked about earlier will change its state, and it'll turn into some of those less stable forms, and it'll tend to rise to the surface of the bar. So if you get a bar that's a little crumbly and maybe it's streaky inside and has light brown, and if you rub it with your thumb and it kind of smudges, there's nothing wrong with it. The temper has just changed. You can eat it. It's not going to hurt you. So chocolate is very dry. It's less than 6% total moisture. And that moisture is really tied up with the sugar. So there's almost zero free moisture for bacteria and microbes to work with. So if it's sealed, cool room temperature, its practical shelf life is almost indefinite. Now, when you introduce nuts and milk, and different game at that point, right? So, yeah, if you get that, you can eat, as long as it's just plain chocolate, eat it just fine. If you learn how to temper, you could actually remelt it and retemper it and make it pretty again. Good questions. Are we all right on time?
Thank you so much, Nick. That was amazing. That was amazing. I actually, as a first job out of high school, worked at a candy and nut store. And so and it was not the high quality, but the lady who ran it was British. And so she knew how to do it. Yeah. So thank you. That was really informative. We had a little bit of science, a little bit of food, a whole lot of good information, and a local person too. So thank you. Okay. So Nick, as part of what we do, we give a gift to have you sign, and we give it to Ross Elementary School. So if you would sign that, that is our thank you. And looking on the inside, looking to be able to get books into the hands of kids, which of course is near and dear to my heart. So our next meeting, next week's speaker will be our own Roger Eshelman, as I indicated, who is our Rotary International Foundation Chair. We will be talking about polio and polio plus. And so please join us for a little bit of learning, a little bit of fellowship, and a little bit of fundraising so that we can help with eradicating polio. So if that's all we have today, I'd like everybody to stand for the four-way test. So of the things we think, say, or do, is it the truth? Is it fair to all concerned? Will it build goodwill and better friendships? Will it be beneficial to all concerned? Will it be fun and kind? Thank you very much, Jennifer. It was great having you here, and we're looking forward to your joining in the membership. So have a great week.